okay? So Vaughn, that essentially at least helps us understand the role and function of our routers, okay, is what we actually have. We're not done yet, Vaughn, okay? Because I mentioned that at the beginning here that we normally actually put switches together as well. So let's take a look at the switching side of things too. So if we now focus in on let me see if I can make that move over just a little bit more. So on these three devices that you're actually seeing right here, as far as I can get, Vaughn, there's actually both of these switches here that you see. Notice that this one says it's a Cisco 3750 V2. This one also says the same thing, but this one says it's a Cisco 2960. Now, Vaughn, most of us, just by looking at the idea of these icons that we see right here on the screen, it's not going to tell us the difference between layer 2 and layer 3 switches, okay? That's not going to do it. If you spend enough time in the realm of Cisco, you can also do this by taking a look at the model numbers is what you can actually do. So inside of the switches, they have different functionalities that are built in, but this Cisco 2960 is a layer 2 switch. The Cisco 3750 is a layer 3 switch as well, okay? Now, at the heart of switching, okay, Vaughn mentioned it in a previous episode here, that when we start talking about the OSI model, right, the Open System Interconnect model, layer 3 switches operate on the network layer, layer 3 of the OSI model. Layer 2 switches operate on the data link layer, which is what NY Access 1 does for us. The NY Core 1, NY Core 2, those are layer 3 switches. NY Access 1, those are going to be essentially layer 2 switches. Now, Vaughn, at the basic heart of this, right, the idea of switches, their particular role is really basic LAN connectivity. Now, at one point, we would have actually done this with hubs as well, but those have kind of disappeared off the scene. So today, our basic connectivity here is going to be, actually the idea here of basic connectivity. So Vaughn, for example, my PLAB Cisco 01 machine, this allows me to connect and route all the way through to outside of my network if I wanted to, okay? And it actually provides the connectivity between this machine here as well as the router that I have available to us. And that is all because they are cabled together to work in the way that they actually do work. But Vaughn, I can change this up if I choose to. But overall though, Vaughn, at this point, all three of these switches are really functioning at layer 2. So they are just a basic connectivity model is what we do see. Now, when it comes down to layer 3 switches, I can then turn on the functionality of layer 3 switches. There's a few different commands that we'd have to do that. But when I do that, they can now act as different routers that are actually out there and available for us. So essentially, Vaughn, I can end up where I'm really working with 5 different routers at the basic functionality if I go ahead and I implement and turn on the layer 3 configuration that I need to make sure that it can function as routers as well, okay? Now, Vaughn, the key there for us, right, and we'll get into this a little bit later in terms of the configuration. That's why we're not doing it right now. But we understand that, okay, is what they function and the way that they function here. So Vaughn, at layer 2, we're talking now at the data link layer, they function based off of MAC address, okay? But with the layer 3 switch, they can either use MAC addresses or IP addresses to decide where the data is going to go, okay? Now, I have made a basic table here. If I can find it, let me see. Oh, there it is, okay. So I made a basic table for us so that we can see the differences between these devices right here at the end of our episode, okay? So Vaughn, when it comes down to the idea of what's the difference between, let's say, a router and a layer 3 switch, that's the key here, right? There's really not a ton of difference, except that layer 3 switches, they can do some functionality of a router, but not everything. So we can do basic router functions. Traffic management, yes, they both can do that as well. But advanced layer 3 routing, a layer 3 switch can't do. So there's other features that regular routers can do, but they can't. The advantage, though, of using a layer 3 switch is in the next one that we call forwarding, okay? Most of the time in terms of routers, we're not really using ASICs in the routers themselves. And that means we do not have that hardware functionality to really speed up the traffic. It's all iOS based, which means it's software based. But in terms of your layer 3 switches, they're using the ASICs of the switch. And that's application specific integrated circuitry, which means it's hardware based of saying where the data is actually going to go from here. It doesn't have to hit the CPU to know what's going to happen. So that's where it actually does have better performance than what a router does. But now we can also have, and I actually put the wrong, I just realized the idea there's supposed to be QoS features, not OOS features. So I have to make a correction there. but it's the idea of quality of service. Notice that layer 3 switches do not tend to have quality of service features, whereas the routers do tend to have that as well. So when people say, should I use a layer 2 or layer 3 switch? Not a layer 2 or layer 3 switch. A layer 3 switch or a router, it depends on what you need. If you only really need basic routing functions, then a layer 3 switch will work for you. But if you're going to put this at the edge of your network and you're going to expect it to do all the other functionalities that you need it to do, okay, such as connecting to different WAN types of connections, you may find some of that functionality, but you won't find all of it. That's when you actually want a router to be there to help you out to actually put all the processing power that you need behind that. So Vaughn, at least at this point, right, the very fact is when we start talking about whether we're talking about routers or switches, hopefully we now understand the roles and the features of both the idea of routers as well as switches, whether they're layer 2 or layer 3 switches as well. So Vaughn, that's also another good point for us to end on as we continue to move through our different networking components.
That was a great little thing at the end, because one of my questions was, well, then when do you know when to have a router and when to have a switch? And I feel you just answered that for me. So thank you, Ronnie. You answered my question without me even having to ask it. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for watching. But we're going to go ahead and sign off for IT Pro TV.